Welcome to Thor Media. I'm Ivan, and this is the Deep Dive. Today, the boys at Thor have asked me to go into a slightly controversial subject, and that's what we're here for. Let's talk about polishing and why my way is a little different. For many years, I've been telling people to cut with a DA and finish with a rotary, and that doesn't always go over so well. So let me explain to you how I got to that, why I suggest that, and why it actually works. First of all, we have to look at the history of the DA. The first DAs started in the late 80s, and those were the porter cables. And for those of you that have got numb hands because of the porter cable, I would like to excuse myself. I'm the one that was behind the development of that tool, and the first vehicle actually polished with one was my car, 1978 Volvo 244DL. And at the time, my intention with that tool was only for hobbyists, never to be in the hands of a professional. But things happened. Now, when I started detailing, you had the choice between a rotary and a rotary. Now, there are other few tools out there, but they weren't necessarily for paint correction. There were the gem polishers, which were large, heavy, about 10-inch diameter, bonnet-style polishers that were meant for applying wax and removing wax residue. Then you had the Cyclo. Now, the Cyclo has been around a very long time, still around, still a great tool, but not necessarily the best for actual paint correction, even though they tried many, many times. But the rotary was king, and the rotary still is in a lot of ways. Fast forward to the late 90s, and a company called Dynabrade out of Buffalo, New York, or actually Clarence, New York, came out with a product that was designed as an attachment for the rotary. So you still had your rotary, but you put this attachment on it. And with that attachment, you now had a 19 millimeter or 3/4 inch stroke DA. And the reason they sold it was to increase the cut of a rotary, not for finishing. It was designed to increase the cut of the rotary. Now, that attachment has long since gone away. Dynabrade is actually making a DA these days. But that being said, that was the original purpose of the dual action. And the reason I say that a dual action cuts more than a rotary is at equal use, meaning the same weight, the same pressure, the same pad, the same abrasive speed, the DA will cut faster. And I've proven this on many videos, my channel and others, that it always does that. But those of you that are out there saying, no, rotary cuts so much more. I base my analysis on scientific facts, not on I feel that it does this. And the science is there. Now, when I do testing, I don't do it on a car. I do it on actual test panels. And these test panels are 24 inch by 24 inch. We weigh them before and we weigh them afterwards. We're not looking at paint correction per se. We're looking at paint removal. And the DA, a long stroke DA. Now, those of you that think your 15 millimeter machine is doing correction, it's a good enhancement tool. You need a longer stroke DA, 21 or 25 millimeters. Then you're actually going to get some cut. So those of you trying to compare a rotary to a 15 millimeter DA, yes, the rotary will cut faster. Back to my thesis, and let me show you how this works. When you're thinking of a rotary, and we'll use abrasive speed in this case. So abrasive speed is calculated by the rotation of the pad. So if you take a 6-inch diameter pad, you put one speck of abrasive on it on the outer edge, and you spin it at 600 RPM, which is a good speed for a rotary to be used at. You're going to get 4.7 meters per second of abrasive travel. Now in the center of the pad, you're going to get much less than that because the rotary is just going around in a circle, and of course, the smaller the diameter, the slower the speed. Now with a DA, that one dot of abrasive that you have on your pad, no matter where it is on the pad, is still going around in a 25 millimeter orbit. One thing I'd like to break the confusion on, sort of, is OPM and RPM. A dual action machine's speed is calculated in orbits per minute, meaning that little 25 millimeter stroke goes around 3,000 times per minute. Meanwhile, a rotary is calculated by rotations per minute, or RPM, and RPM is the rotation of the pad. Now, on a DA, a lot of people really freak out when the pad stops rotating. It's stalled. Depending on the size of the stroke, Yes, it can have a bit of an effect, but not as much as you think. On an 8 millimeter machine, you'll get about a 25% reduction in cutting ability. On a 15-21, you'll get between 10 and 15%. And on a 25, you'll get just about 5% of cutting efficiency loss because of the lack of rotation. The rotation on a DA is not fast. It's somewhere between 50 and 100 revolutions per minute. So it's not really impacting how the DA is working that much. It does make the DA smoother, and it does make it a lot easier to control when you do have that rotation. But that rotation doesn't impact the cut as much as people think it is. It's not the rotation that's cutting, it's the orbits that are cutting. And no matter where you are on the pad, that 25 millimeter circle that the orbit is doing is cutting. So the whole pad is cutting exactly the same. Now, another part of this is, what are you trying to do? If you're trying to remove as much material as possible with no regard to the safety of the paint, then yes, the old wool pad at 2000 RPM, you're going to cut a lot. But you're also heating up the paint dramatically, and heat is the enemy of modern day paints. When I started detailing, heat was actually a good thing. On nitrocellulose lacquer, you wanted heat. You could actually reflow the lacquer a little bit. Today's paints do not reflow. That is a sort of a misconception that's been carried over for decades. But no, they don't reflow. You are removing clear coat. So every time you polish, you are actually damaging the vehicle. Every time you polish, you're removing clear coat. And that clear coat removal is damaging the paint because you can't put it back. Now, back to the speed. When we're cutting with a rotary, we're doing a good job. But we are leaving defects behind. We're leaving those rotary swirls, what everyone is afraid of with a rotary. And when you're cutting with a rotary, they're inevitable. You're not going to get away from it. And don't try to get away from it. You're just going to get frustrated. That's what finishing is for. With those defects comes a little more work when it comes to finishing. So cutting with a DA, let's just say it's as fast or maybe 10% slower than cutting with a rotary. You're going to make up that time dramatically when it comes to finishing, because cutting with a DA and a wool pad, you're going to finish much faster than cutting with a rotary and a wool pad. Another area where people get caught up and don't do it right is pad choice. Now, there are many types of pads on the market, the most popular being foam, wool, and microfiber. There's rayon, there's denim, there's corduroy, there's all sorts of different things, but we'll just focus on those ones. First of all, microfiber, for me, is not a great pad for polishing paint. It creates too much heat. Heat is your enemy when you're polishing, and I'll get into heat generation a little later. Microfiber pads, yes, they're fibrous, but they do create a lot of heat, and that heat is not something you want to be creating. Now, if you're polishing aluminum, microfiber pads are great. If you're cleaning a leather seat, microfiber pads are spectacular on your DA. But no, please don't use them on paint. You get the impression you're cutting a lot, but actually you're swelling the paint a lot, first of all. Secondly, you are damaging the paint because you're creating too much heat. Now, wool pads. Wool has been around for a long time in detailing for a reason. It's a great product and it works. So when DAs started becoming popular in the early 2000s, I set out to design a pad to make the DA cut the way it should. And that pad is still around today. You can buy it at DIY. It's our wool cutting pad. When I designed that pad, the 15 and 21 millimeter stroke DAs were just starting to become popular. And with that, people were trying to adapt pads designed for a rotary to put on that machine. And it doesn't work. Your normal wool cutting pad is not going to work well on that type of DA. And the microfiber pads that were developed for short stroke DAs also don't work well on the long stroke DAs. A lot of people use them. A lot of people think they work well. And yes, they do a certain job. But if you're to actually use a wool pad designed for it, you'll see there's a big difference. Next, the traditional wool pad, well, it's not good on the DA. The long fiber length is way too much, and it absorbs the movement of the DA way too much, meaning you're losing a lot of cut because of that long pile depth. You don't want a pile depth more than 1/4 of an inch when you're working with a DA. 5/16 at most, but 1/4 inch is ideal, or 6 millimeters. Then there's foam. Now, Meguiar's was one of the first companies to come out with a foam pad. This was back in the late 70s, I believe. And it was just a flat foam pad that you screwed on. It came with its own backing plate. You screwed it onto your rotary and you tried finishing with that. It was brown. It did the job, but it wasn't great. Then 3M came along and made foam pads way better. And how they did it was to make them a waffle surface. And the reason I like waffles so much and the reason the DIY pads are waffles is because of a lot of testing. Once again, waffle pads do a number of things for you. First of all, they reduce heat generation. That's very important. Secondly, they actually conform to the surface much better. And by conforming to the surface, you're actually getting more cut because more of the pad is touching the surface. If you go over a body line with a flat pad, you have to sort of go up the hill and then down the hill and try to work it in. Whereas with a waffle pad, it just follows the surface. You don't have to do gymnastics with your polisher to get it to cut everywhere. The other advantage of a waffle pad is user experience. Now, a flat pad will try to pull you around a little bit. It will accentuate any vibration in the tool. A waffle pad allows you to control it, and at the same time will actually absorb some of the vibrations from the machine. So it'll make any machine seem smoother and seem nicer to use, which is a good thing. We want that with any machine. Now for myself and the system that I've designed, the wool pad is for cutting, the red jeweling pad is for finishing, and the single step pad is a firm waffle pad. The thickness of the pad also has a big incidence on how they work. A thinner pad will give you more cut, and a thicker pad will give you a better finish and more user control. Now, the reason for that is foam is flexible. Some of you like to put weight on your pads. And if your pad is too soft, you're just going to be squishing the pad and losing any work that it can do for you. So the firmer pad allows you to get that cut that you need without having to put pressure on the machine. Whereas the soft pad allows you to get the finish that you want without having to move the machine around too much. Now, I mentioned in the beginning, I cut with a DA and I finish with a rotary. So I explained to you why I cut with a DA, but now why do I finish with a rotary? Before the DA existed, no one had ever heard of the term micromarring. That's because a rotary does not create micromarring. Now, a rotary in the hands of someone that isn't experienced will create swirls, or actually in the hands of someone that's experienced will create swirls. I've taught thousands of people how to polish, and when I get someone that's never polished before, I start them off with a rotary, not with a DA. And they do a wonderful job finishing with a rotary their first time around. Why? Because they have no preconceived notions of what they're doing. They have no bad habits to break. They haven't seen someone else do it. They haven't been taught by someone else. I'm not saying that my way is the best or my way is the only way. It's just the way that I've always taught and the way that I've grown to use. Because I've been detailing for 40 some years and my background is actually research and development. I want things to perform. I want to make everyone's life easier and I want to do it through engineering. In doing that, that's how I come up with these systems. Now, I come from owning multiple shops, body shops, and detailing shops, and my painters were extremely reluctant to use a DA for cutting. They were dead set against it until I had one sand a panel and said, here, you do half the panel with your rotary, I'll do half the panel with my DA, we'll see who gets the better quality finish first. I was finished way before he was. That's the day his rotary became a finishing only tool and his DA was for cutting. Oh, hold up a second. One little thing that you need to know. I'm not the only person on Thor Media. There's a lot of great podcasters here. Every day, there's at least one Thor Media podcast. You should really subscribe and listen to those podcasts. Back to the task at hand. We're finishing with a rotary. Yes, finishing with a rotary is as simple as it can be. First of all, you've got less vibration, less noise. It's easier to control. And that's where people get in, that's where people start having problems. They're trying to control the machine. If you ever see me polish, you'll notice that I've got maybe 2-3 fingers at most on a machine. That's because I'm not trying to control the machine. I'm trying to guide the machine. And by guiding the machine and letting it do the controlling, it's fine. You're not going to get swirls. You're not going to get buffer trails because you're not forcing the machine. It's when you force the machine to do something that it's like a teenager. It forces back. Oh yeah, you want me to do that? Screw you. I'm not going to do it. But if you just guide it, move it along the way it wants to be moved along, you'll be fine. So next time you're trying with a rotary, there's a few things you need to finish properly. First of all, do not use flat pads. I wake up around 3:15 every morning so I can hate flat pads just a little longer every day. Yes, they're a lot easier to manufacture, but they are not the best solution. Try a waffle pad, try a flat pad in the same foam, and you'll see. But nonetheless, flat pads, you're almost guaranteed to get buffer trails. It takes a lot of skill to finish with a flat pad and not get buffer trails. And that's why 3M, for many, many decades, has been selling waffle pads. And every body shop in the industry uses 3M waffle pads. They're out there. Their black pad is great for finishing, but it has one downfall. The foam is actually too thin on it. And that's why the pad that I designed is actually one of the thickest ones in the industry. At 1.25 inches thick, it's much thicker, giving you more cushioning, giving you more cooling ability, and giving you better results. The other technique that will definitely induce swirls when polishing is pressure. Don't put pressure on your machine. Let the machine do the work. You bought the machine, let it do its job. Don't micromanage it, just guide it. Try to be a good manager. A good manager just tells the employee what needs to be done. A good manager will not tell the employee how to do the job, unless they're just in training. So look at your waffle pad and your polisher as a really good employee that knows what they're doing, and you just have to tell them, hey, go off and do this job. You're just guiding them, and that's what it is. And once you learn to just guide the machine, so no pressure, even close your eyes when you're polishing. Keep in a safe area. This is just for testing. Just close your eyes and try to balance the machine and keep it in one spot for a few seconds. And once you can do that with just 1 or 2 fingers on the machine, you'll be good. From there, you'll never get a swirl again. As soon as you apply pressure, you're going to get swirls. As soon as you tilt the machine, you're going to get swirls. As soon as you use a flat pad, you're going to get swirls. Hey there, me again. Yes, the guy that's always interrupting. Remember to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. I love answering your questions. The other thing is, the Thor guys are doing this giveaway thing again. So if you'd like to win this week's $100 gift, very easy. Leave a comment below. Those of you that are subscribed and have left a comment are automatically entered to win. Now, back to the regular programming. Another important part of the polishing system that I developed over the years is having a damp pad. Not a wet pad, a damp pad. And when I say damp, your average 6-inch pad will gain 1 milliliter or 1 gram of weight in moisture. That is not a lot. And you've heard some companies say, you have to use our pads on our machines because they're balanced to the machine. If you weigh all their pads, guess what? They don't weigh the same. So what's this about having to have the pads exactly matched to the machine? When you're spinning the pad out to get the excess moisture out, you're actually going to find that it gets its own equilibrium and your machine will run smoother. The other thing that a damp pad does is it runs cooler. And the cooler we can keep the surface, the better it is. I mentioned I had body shops before. And if you look at the data sheets for paints, they will tell you that it's not good to exceed ambient temperature more than 40 degrees. So if it's 70 degrees in your shop, you never want the paint to get over 110 degrees. And the closer you can keep it to 70, the better it's going to be. When we're cutting or polishing paint, the lower the temperature is, the better it is. Let me explain it to you this way. If you take sandpaper to an ice cube, you actually will remove ice from the ice cube. If you take sandpaper to a marshmallow, you'll make a gooey mess. When you heat up paint, and today's paints, clear coats, are plastic. When you heat up plastic, it gets soft. When it gets soft, the abrasive, instead of going across and shearing the surface, goes across and sort of grabs and rolls. The abrasive loses its effectiveness. And also, you're damaging the paint. You might not see the damage today, but you will eventually. And when you see that damage, it's not a good thing. You don't want to be creating heat. And that's where, again, a damp pad helps and a waffle pad helps. The other aspect of the damp pad is we're not dry buffing. For dry buffing, a lot of people have different techniques to try to eliminate it. One is taking almost like a paintbrush and covering the pad in polish. That's great for creating dust, by the way. The other one is putting the 4 or 5 drops on the pad and then bumping it on the surface where they're going to be polishing. Just try to spread it out. The other one is starting at a very low speed and going slowly and trying to get it spread until you get the pad covered. All time wasters. We're not here to try to extend the polishing time as long as possible. It's a stage that you want to get through, especially if you're doing this for profit. If you're a hobbyist and you want to try to find the longest way to stay in the garage to do the job, well, by all means, do those techniques. But for those of us that make a living detailing, we want to get it done quickly, efficiently, and of the highest quality possible. With a damp pad, you put your 3 drops, or I prefer to spray the polish on, and once it's on there, you can start polishing immediately. You don't have to work the polish around. You don't have to dab it in. You don't have to spread it with your finger. Just put it on the pad and start going, because the pad is damp, and that dampness reduces the friction. So you're not going to be dry buffing. And dry buffing creates excessive heat. Dry buffing can also create that micro marring that we really don't want to see. The other aspect of dampening the pad is it makes it conform better. And by conforming, what we're meaning is we're never polishing a perfectly flat panel. There's always a bit of crown or roundness to it. And a waffle pad that's damp is going to contour to that much, much easier, much better. Finally, when it comes to a damp pad, it's actually going to clean out much easier. And when it comes to cleaning your pads, there's a few things that I'd like to pass on. Do not use compressed air. Let me repeat that. Do not use compressed air. The reason I'm repeating that is it is a fantastic way of destroying your pads. They're not going to last as long. Secondly, you're putting very dangerous dust into the air. Please don't do that. Now, if you're using a pad washer, and there are many ways, you don't even have to buy a pad washer. You can dampen the pad with a spray bottle, massage it a little bit, and spin it out in a bucket if you want. That still is doing a much better job than that compressed air. Now, some companies will willingly tell you that compressed air is the best way to clean their pads. It's the best way to get you to buy more pads. It's not the best way to clean their pads. And if you think about it, the little amount of moisture that's left in the pad. Now, I like to use rinseless wash as my pad cleaning solution. Let's do a bit of math here. You have 1 milliliter of water. If you don't know how small 1 milliliter is, go get a child's aspirin bottle, the ones that are liquid, and it has a little dropper on it. Just see how much 1 milliliter is. Now, most rinseless washes on the market, and by the way, don't use a polymer rinseless wash for this. Use a surfactant or hybrid rinseless wash. But most rinseless washes on the market are diluted 256 to 1. So that means you only have 1/250th of chemical of a milliliter in that pad at most when you're spinning out the pad properly in a pad washer. It is not going to affect your polish. Now, what it will do is give you a better finish and better cut, because a cool pad cuts better. A damp pad cuts better. And you're going to be creating less dust, less polish, less heat, and spending less time. So if you've never tried a damp pad, and not a wet pad, a damp pad, and there are a few things that you need to know. If you're using a forced rotation DA, I'm sorry, it cannot spin the pad fast enough to get enough moisture out of it. If you're using a DA that has an interference backing plate, there are some of them out there that do not free spin. So if it's not free spinning, then you need to do a washer mod. It's going to make your polishing a lot better, first of all, but then it will allow you to clean out your pads. And finally, if you're using a rotary, you need a rotary that goes above 2200 RPM. Below that speed, it's not enough to get the moisture out of the pad. The final part of the systems that I've developed are spray polishes. Why spray polishes? First of all, a good spray polish will use a lot less material. One spray is maybe 1 or 2 milliliters of product. Those 3 or 4 drops you're putting on your pad, each one of those is 2 to 3 milliliters of product. So a spray polish, you use a quarter of the polish that you normally would using a traditional method. The other thing is now you have thousands of little drops of polish on the pad as opposed to 3 big drops. So eliminating that need to spread it around. And unfortunately, when you have too much polish on the pad, you end up with dust. That's all you're doing. You're converting the excess polish to dust. Now, even with a spray polish, you can get dust. And what causes dust when you're polishing? First of all, you're going to get dust if you have too much product on the pad. We've covered that already. You're going to get dust if you overheat the pad. You're going to get dust if you're polishing past the abrasive cycle. And by that, I mean you're polishing and you just keep going and going and going and going and going. What happens is we're actually removing clear coat, and it's not necessarily the polish that's causing the dust, it's the clear coat accumulation on your pad. And that's why I recommend to clean your pad after every section. One thing I've been telling people for decades, do not put clean polish on a dirty pad. So as soon as you pull that pad off the paint, don't put more polish on it. Stop, clean the pad, then put polish on it, start polishing again. That little 30 seconds it takes you to clean your pad, you're going to get a much better finish and much better cut because now your pad isn't loaded. Any of you that have polished single stage paint, you know immediately that your pad changes color. It looks horrendous. You're polishing a red car with a yellow pad and 30 seconds later, your yellow pad is now red. You're doing the exact same amount of transfer onto your pad with clear coat. It's just you don't see it because it's clear. So we need cleaner pads. So the takeaways from this is, yes, I'm a little kook, but I've done a lot of R&D. I've done a lot of research on this, and it's a system. And once you have a proper system, and I'm not saying, again, that mine is the only system or the best system, but it's one that I know that works exceptionally well. And a lot of people, once they try it, they adopt it because it works. Now, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas, please leave them below. I'm always happy to answer, and we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.